Okay, so let's see how we get on now.
Yeah.
Fantastic, brilliant. So it looks like we are back live on Facebook. I'm so sorry about being kicked off there. If you missed the start, we've actually got an introduction which is completely separate to this. So apologies for the technical issue. I have invested in some new internet and I'm not so impressed with this broadband connection at the moment, but let's see how it goes. But Shamima, you were just saying about some of the comparisons between people that do like high performance sports as well as some of the people that do more kind of day-to-day activities and sports, and the need for that mental health and well-being associated with both.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's tools and techniques that we can all utilize in our everyday work and lifestyle that many of the elite athletes and elite executive leaders are implementing in their own routines in life for that performance mindset and to accomplish goals as well as for their well-being.
Brilliant, brilliant. So Stan, you must see quite a lot of the evidence of this on the athletics track when you're coaching people. But when you get people coming onto the track side, do you find that sometimes they can experience a change, so positive and negative, stepping onto that track into that training session? And how do you think it affects them leaving as well in terms of going back into real life?
Yeah, a lot of that, Steve. I can say it's something that you cannot really divorce from the actual physical engagement that athletes do on the track or whatever medium or whatever surface that they are training at. If they bring their body there, just their physical body there without their mental side, you know, it's almost certain that that whole experience there will be compromised. The whole training experience in itself is compromised. And therefore, it's almost, you know, prudent on the part of a coach, you know, from my standpoint, to first establish that everything is all right, you know, as all right as it can be for the purposes of that session. Otherwise, you really would not be able to get as much as you need from the body if their mind is not set on what task you are set out for that day. So there's need for them to, if they are going to own the session, by owning mean if they are going to engage with it fully, I really, from a coaching point of view, would need them to be, you know, inherent with it. It's something that has got to be innate, something that's coming from their inside. And that becomes a very difficult transaction if their mind is not involved, if their mind is not in the right place, or if the emotions are all over the place, or rather the emotions pertinent to what we are doing on the track is all over the place. It becomes a difficult job indeed. That's when you really have to find other means of which you can extract, bring them in and put their attention and focus on the moment so they stay in the moment. For others, that's an easy thing because they are skilled in that way. Others, maybe it's just their natural disposition. Others are able to find that easily. But for others, it's really an uphill task that they need lots of support. And as a coach, it's an area that you want to upskill yourself to be able to do that. Otherwise, there's not the totality of the person within that training environment.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I've found quite interesting recently is I did my background's in neuroscience, so understanding a little bit about how the brain's wired has been really fascinating to learn. My dad's actually a psychologist, so it's interesting growing up in that scenario. So I've kind of been immersed to it, and I hadn't realized that other people didn't understand that the brain was like a muscle and you can train it. So just as much as, and it just seems to be just as much as any other muscle in the body is what I was going to say, but there seems to be an increased trend at the moment in particular. Obviously there's a huge need for it at the moment with regards to the stress and the situation that people are under, personally, professionally, in every aspect of their life because of the constraints that's been put on them psychologically and physically now with the virus and everything else that's going on, and emotionally as well. Why do you think there's that lack of perception between like people understanding that the brain is part of their body and not like something that someone else has got to worry about, or we go and see a psychologist if we've got something wrong with our brain, or it's not working as well as it could do, or oh, that's someone else's problem? Why do you think that's the case, Shamima? Would you might disagree with that, but what's your views on that?
Well, I think traditionally, unfortunately, the words psychologist, psychology, mental health have all had some stigma attached to those words. And I think more recently, there has been a big shift and a big push to normalize what is really about taking care of our health. You know, we take care of our physical health, so isn't it just as important to take care of our mental health? And that involves, you know, exercising the brain, if you like, because when you sort of talk about it being a muscle, if we practice and exercise some of these mental tools and techniques to strengthen our ability to manage some of those emotions that Stan was talking about, and really place ourselves in the moment and focus our attention on the task at hand, that becomes easier with practice. So, you know, it's just as you go out to practice a physical skill and technique, you know, you have coaches and S&C coaches that really train the body and the technique and the tactical side of any skill acquisition. In the same way, you've got to go and practice and train the brain.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm not quite sure. I would say that historically, it's perhaps been thought of as very different, just because there has been some stigma attached to the fact that, you know, a psychologist deals with, in the past, I think they used to think, oh, they deal with illness, and of just the way that it was being treated in the past.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Guys, if you just joined us on Facebook, it'd be great to get some questions about mindset, improving your brain function when it comes to mindset and like psychological well-being. You might have some questions or some challenges that you think would be potentially interesting to talk about, but we'd love to hear from you if you're on Facebook right now, to get some opinions as to what the general public think about mindset would also be interesting as well. But Shamima, I think it was Descartes, if I'm not incorrect, that had this idea of the body being made up of lots of different parts. And it was only until people started to think about the more holistic approach to the body that they started to piece it back together. Do you think there's some of that creeping into modern understanding about how the body works? Like you go and see this person for this and this person for this, and it's still quite fragmented.
It depends. It depends where you go. I mean, I think certain, for instance, your practice is more holistic. You have all the different people within your practice that are, and you're working quite collectively with an individual. So I think that kind of model is becoming, again, more favorable. You go into an elite sport performance environment, you are working within multidisciplinary teams, which include the coaches, the strength and conditioning coaches, your physios, your sports medicine people, psychologists, and you're all surrounding an athlete and providing them with what they need to be at their best and perform to at a very high level. So I think that model is certainly becoming more popular. I can't say why it's taken us so long to get here, but sure, traditionally it's been very fragmented.
Yeah. Stan, from a performance point of view, obviously you deal a lot with the actual aspects of running and high performance, but do you think from a performance point of view that that's also still lacking in the sports industries, where you have your different people that are working with people? It's very rare that you find a collective of actually like-minded people that can work together and facilitate the goal of that particular athlete in mind.
Yeah, I think also from a history point of view, coaching itself has come, the way of, what Shamima has, explained there. Coaching really in the past used to be a lone ranger type of engagement. The coach was basically the all and everything regarding the development of an athlete. The coach did every element and every aspect of what that athlete needed. But of course, understanding, contemporary thinking and understanding is that, and perception is that, to which I fully subscribe, is that is really not possible. A coach cannot be able to deal with all the elements that are required to bring about high performance.
Yeah.
Something is going to be compromised in the process if they are not if the approach is not interdisciplinary, because there's not a way that a coach who, like I am in my, from my viewpoint, major in neuromechanics for speed,
Right.
that I can deliver the same thing, for nutrition, which is something that the athlete needs. It's a component. If I think that I can take that one on, I've just allowed my ego to come in the way. But understanding would tell me that I will need a nutritionist, specific nutritionist practitioner and expert to deal with that side of the matter, that if I want total performance or optimal performance to come from an athlete. So it's the same thing with Steve. Those problems are the same even within the sporting arena, high performance included. Coaches are beginning to overcome the struggles of working one with another with the different practitioners on the same team because of previous perceptions of ownership. The coach owns the team, or the coach owns the athlete, or the coach owns whatever. Those perceptions are beginning to fall away.
Yeah.
And where they've been allowed to fall away, there is cooperation and coordinated work between different practitioners. Yes, to serve the person that matters, which is the elite athlete. If we want elite performance to come out of it, there's going to be elite input, and that elite input is not possible to come from one source. It has to come from the different fields and people that have taken time to upskill themselves and, give expertise and knowledge within those fields, then bring those to the table and make it possible and avail it rather to the athlete or to the team if we're going to get any high performance out of it. So yes, it is the journey, the background is the same, but this is where we are and this is where we need to be.
Yeah. Sam, so I've got a very interesting question to you, but I'm also going to ask Shamima as well, because I think there's certain elements that kind of cross over there. Coach and teacher, they're often very confused, aren't they? But what would you say the role of the coach and the teacher is? Because for me, they're two completely different things, but you may again have your own opinions on this. I'd love to hear your input because obviously Stan's a coach. So Stan talks about this holistic model and working with other people, but ultimately it's for the benefit of the athlete in the center of that organization. So, and Shamima is a psychologist. She helps people from one particular perspective, but do you find that you cross over between the teacher and the coach role, or do you have clear definitions of the two of them?
There's a crossover. It depends, with the environment in which you are in. It is also dependent on the task at hand. Which one of the skill sets, would best deliver that challenge? In some cases, I would need to be a teacher, where I have to bring about, a cognitive transaction between the athlete and the material or the subject matter that we are dealing with. I would need that methodology of teaching to bring about a learning experience. In some cases, in other cases where the challenge is not one of learning in that way, it is one where we're looking for a different learning method or teaching method, where coaching in itself becomes one, where it's almost high precision that we're looking for. That's when I have to swap my cap there, move away from being a teacher and become a coach. With a coach, then the relationship also becomes different. The manner in which we are dealing with that subject matter becomes also different. It's no longer just at the cognitive level. It comes in even very closer also to an emotive level. It comes in even deeper than that, where the coach sits and where I can't sit as a teacher, so to speak. So yes, there's a constant crossover within myself, depending on what the learning task is at a particular time. And also it's dependent on the athlete. How best they learn will in itself induce a type of delivery from the coach, from me, whether I'm more of a coach with them or I'm more of a teacher with them, depending on their learning style.
Yeah. Shamima, what are your views on coach and teacher, in particular in like a public setting as well?
Well, I can only give you my perspective as a psychologist in my role as a psychologist. And in my role as a psychologist, I might go in as an educator to educate on certain topics that will help coaches and even athletes to sort of upskill and learn certain ideas that they can then go away and reflect upon and implement in their environments. But then, of course, as a psychologist, I'm more of a coaching hat on, or helping hand sort of cap on when I'm sitting face to face with an athlete and I'm leading them to self-actualization. They become almost the masters of their own destination through the questions and the open-ended questions that I'm asking them to think about, rather than being so prescriptive.
Yeah. I think we talked about this when I first met you, actually, Shamima, how you see your role as more of a kind of getting people on the right track, so teaching them the basic skills, and then basically helping them, like, push them along a little bit, and then showing them the way, and then watching them grow, and then supporting them as they go. And then there's kind of this linear process. And I think some people worry about getting involved with coaches or psychologists because they feel sometimes it's a bit of a circular service. So there's no end, there's no start and there's no finish. So people just kind of go on and on and on. But I think because I've been having some coaching actually in Australia, because it works quite well with my hectic lifestyle. So I work really hard during the day, and then I work my head really hard at night time as well. So it's perfect. It's great. I've got twice as many days.
You sleep, by the way, Stephen.
I've got 14 days a week. These people are complaining about not enough days in the week. There's an extra 7 there if you think about it. But yeah, I'm slightly nuts when it comes to that. But I think I want to be at the top of the game. So I know that that's a personal journey. I'm not competitive. You look at other people, but you're on your own journey essentially. I think because I've come from sports and I used to play some tennis, and we did a lot of visualization with the coach that we started with, and it was so powerful. Like the fact that you could lay on a tennis court and you'd get off the tennis court and you'd be exhausted, almost like you played a 3-set match of tennis, but you hadn't even hit a tennis ball because you just mentally pressing. Yeah. It was amazing. It's amazing. Just really struck home. But it made me think that actually there's something really powerful in, like, using the mind to improve the physical, even if it's just the physical, never mind everything else, but just the physical attributes of of sports. And I think there is some research, isn't there, to show that just by thinking about going to the gym or lifting your arm up, doing bicep curls, you can increase the power of your biceps, which I think is quite interesting. But yeah, it's been really fascinating. But with this particular situation now with the COVID crisis, because I know that's what we started off talking about, people have almost been forced into this kind of very introspective, I should call it, not introvert. People don't like being called introvert. I actually love it now because it's probably my superpower being introvert, because I can just focus. But that introspective aspect of being introvert is quite powerful. When it doesn't dominate. I think there is a negative aspect of that with that overthinking, which I'm sure you'll talk to us about, Shalima. But do you think the COVID crisis has actually been very powerful to make people, just force people to be contained within their own what's the words? Their own layer, let's call it. So like a lion, a lion's layer. So their own kingdom, but without having the input of all this external noise almost that comes into how they live their lives and how they look after themselves as well. But what do you think the negative and positive effects of the COVID crisis have been, Shamima?
Stephen, I think everyone is different, and I think we need to recognize that some people might be thriving, as you are perhaps, in this sort of environment, and others are really finding it difficult. Especially, you talk about this introvert extrovert sort of continuum, if you like. You can think of it as a continuum. Some people thrive on connection and physical connection and social engagement. Others don't need it as much. I think the key is here is to really a few things is to really be okay with uncertainty, to accept that this is what we have right now. So what can we do to make it easier on ourselves if we're uncomfortable with it, and for those who are love it and will find it easier, and they'll find it easier to focus and place their intention on the things that they want to do. But basically it's really important to show yourself some self-compassion and recognize that you might be a little bit up and down every day. And that's okay. But to set out with some tasks every day, and to really try and find some structure. And to sort of think about planning your day so that it gives you something to work towards. Now, you may not be so productive and get through everything that you planned and you set out to do, but to be more accepting of that too. But at least the very fact that you have a plan of action, you've got a structure, keeps you working towards something. And I think that that's really important. And there's other things about, for those people who are very sociable and like to socially engage with others, right now it's more about emotional engagement. Emotional connection. So really connecting with people on the phone or Zoom, although again, everything in excess, there are negatives for that as well. I mean, we've seen studies showing that people are finding it exhausting being on Zoom, that focusing on a screen all day for students, for adults, has been quite exhausting. So change it up, be creative. You can connect over a phone, connect on other forums that don't necessarily need your focus and attention on a screen. But that is another way, to stay emotionally engaged and emotionally connected to people. So yeah, I think it's really not being too hard on yourself, showing yourself some compassion, but actually trying to find some structure, setting out a plan for the day, and committing to a couple of tasks that help you to feel productive and achieving something at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Let me tell you something, Shamima. We had a team meeting yesterday. This was. I had a very intense session with my coach on Sunday, like really intense, like out of body experience type stuff that he was doing inside my head. It was very strange stuff, but it was so strange in this meeting. I don't know what we're talking about, like just the plan going forwards and everything else. And all of a sudden, it was like, vroom, all of these emotions started coming up. My team will laugh. We had 30 people on the line on my Zoom call in front of my whole team. It was literally like Niagara Falls, and I've never really had anything like that before. But it was just fascinating to realize that, like, you're human. As much as you want to be the best and be at the top, you're still going to have this issue that you are human, and it's not such an issue, but it's clearly there's a balance there, isn't there? And I think no matter how hard you push, you've got to balance up the other side, because sooner or later, if it keeps up inside you, it's going to come out, and it's probably going to come out at the worst time possible. So dealing with it a little bit at a time, I guess, is probably one way to get around that.
Yeah, and developing awareness, I think that is the most important thing for any person, is having an awareness of being curious about what you're feeling, or what sort of thoughts are going through your mind. What's your internal dialogue? Is it helpful? Is it constructive? Is it unhealthy? But a lot of people aren't very aware. I've sat with people who sort of say, well, they feel dull, but they can't explain what that means, or they just sort of say, they're dull, and then we explore, what does that look like? What does that mean? And slowly they build an awareness around when it happens, how it happens, when it shows up, these certain feelings or these certain thoughts that they have, just by being a bit curious and recognizing what's going on right now with no judgment. It's not about judging yourself or feeling guilty at the fact that you're having some of these negative thoughts, or that you're not feeling as happy as the rest of them that you're seeing on the Zoom call with you, and to sort of ask yourself, what is it right now that I'm not feeling great? Why am I not feeling so great? And develop that awareness. So I think once you can develop that awareness and you start to see a pattern, perhaps you might recognize it sooner and be able to then give yourself some time and with some of the tools and techniques, respond to it in a different way. So for me, that's key.
No, it's really interesting. Thank you very much. Stan, internal dialogue, Shamima was mentioning about it. You must come across that a lot with athletes and performers that you work with, because it's that negative, positive self-talk is often actually what they can use to inspire them to achieve better intrinsically. But on the other side of that, can be very destructive as well, and lead to kind of poor results, and overthinking and choking is a big consequence of that, I imagine. But what's your experience of that in athletics?
Yeah, it surely does play, a huge role in that. It makes the difference on whether the athlete is on point, they are in the moment, they are in the zone, if you like, which is a term that they use a lot. By being in the flow, in the zone and in the flow, meaning there is congruency between their physical and their mental and their perception of the task. And therefore they are able to align what they can themselves perceive as the resource that they have, be it energy, be it their skill, be it their strength, speed, or endurance. They feel they've got enough resources there to be able to meet that task. It's usually when the athlete is in that zone where they feel they have enough resources to overcome the task that they tend to perform well. When they are a bit asunder, where they cannot, fully get a grip on how much resources they've got, technically or otherwise, then they have a problem even with a task that they should be able to be performing. that's when we start getting sometimes underperformance, even in a training session, or underperformance in a competition. It's essentially because, you know, it's not that they haven't put in the miles in training. It's not like they haven't put in all the intensity and the quality of training. It's simply because they could not, when it mattered, harness all those resources which they've got within themselves to come and bring them to bear within the demands of that particular race or particular portion of play in a game. So yes, when it comes to coaching and training, that has got to be incorporated from a coaching point of view, so that they are constantly, as an elite athlete, they are constantly in control, or are directed towards being in control of their resources, which is not always possible because, like Shamima referred, you know, infers there, being human, they have the whole other social, you know, social gamut of things that they're going to bring over to the track with, you know, things that have come, that's happened in their own lives at home, within their own domestic settings. They will bring that at the track. For others, it's easy to relinquish that. For others, it takes a while. Others cannot.
Yeah.
So you just have to be able to be at your empathetic best as a coach, to be able, one, to identify and recognize something of the sort is taking place, and two, decide the best strategy to manage it, you know, and then allow them, you know, to be able to do what they set out to do, which is, you know, I think, which is what my role as a coach is, ensure that they achieve that, you know, that performance for the time that they've come there to try and achieve it.
It's interesting what you say there, Stan. I think, you know, I like to look at life as a what do you call it? A scale. A pendulum, right? So in the middle of that, you've got well-being, and then you've got the challenge on the other side, and the resources on the other side. As soon as the challenges become too heavy, you're out of balance.
Yeah.
And your well-being might suffer. And so it's about then finding those resources to pull you back into an equilibrium state, if you like.
Yeah.
But as you say, perception has an impact on that too, because you may very well have the resources, but how you perceive those resources and how you perceive a particular situation, whether you perceive it as a threat or you perceive it as this is an exciting opportunity, can really impact that pendulum either way, you know. Or what would you say, the scale rather than a pendulum, you know. But I think perception can be very strong in that, having that impact. But you mentioned too about, you know, athletes turning up, and you being the coach, and athletes turning up, and some will have a lot of stuff going on, you know, in their lives, and some can actually turn up and still perform to their very best level, whereas others, they struggle because of all the other stuff that's going on. I think the idea is that yes, we acknowledge that there's a lot of stuff going on in life. Athletes can only figure out a way to manage themselves better and to be able to perform in the moment and stay present in the moment with engaging with some of the tools and techniques and having the right support around them. When they and that's part of the resources. So, you know, the resources are not just about you having those skills, it's also about having the right support around you. So if you've got that support around you that can help you really unpack and process some of the other stuff that's going on around you, or you're connected to the right people who are helping you through those difficulties, that's part of your resource pool. But try and do it alone and try and keep, and shut it out and bottle it up or park it on your own. Sometimes, that's not the most helpful.
It's a very interesting thing you've just mentioned there, because it hadn't ever, I mean, I was going back to my little episode the other day. It hadn't really ever occurred to me that that was about balance, but I didn't really understand how because I am introvert, so I didn't really understand how other people were very important to that resource aspect that you quite rightly pointed out. So it is fascinating seeing the response of the team like around me. And one of them sent me this very powerful Rudyard Kipling quote, and it basically ended, the strength of the wolf is the pack, but the strength of the pack is the wolf. Right. Yeah. Which I thought was just like I mean, she's going to watch this and she's going to be like excited that I mentioned her. But Natalie, that was awesome, and it really was exactly the right thing I needed to hear at that time, because it was just very poignant that actually you can separate the wolf from the pack, but actually it's about the strength in numbers as well as the strength of the individuals within that, which I think the balance between introvertism and extrovertism is really important dynamic to understand in life, that continuum that you mentioned. So yeah, it was fascinating. Thanks for talking about that. It's really good. Yeah, very interesting. So coming out of the COVID, Shamima, do you think there's any particular risks that people need to be aware of being in this very high pressured or potentially enjoyable situation, depending on which way they perceive it, and coming out of that back into the old normal life in terms of what they were used to or semi-used to before?
Stephen, I'm not sure that we can think about going back to the old normal.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that necessarily exists, because we're all changed through this period in one way or another. We've all had to learn to adjust and adapt. Some have managed it better than others, okay, but we've all been living through this uncertainty, and it's not as if, even though we're trying to go back to some sort of way of living right now, given that our government has allowed us to go about doing some things, it's with a lot of conditions in place. Just to give you an example, I mean, our tennis club is opened up, and being a member of a tennis club, I'm desperately wanting to get on a court and hit some balls. But, we have to think about everything in terms of, we're not allowed to pick up the tennis balls, or you're only allowed to pick up the tennis balls if they're your own. And then if they're your own, it's fine, but the other person on the other side of the court can't pick up your tennis ball. So they have to pass it back to you without holding the ball. I mean, they've implemented all these different rules to try and keep people safe. Staggering courts so that you're not all arriving at the same time to get on court. And so what I'm trying to say is that for some time to come, things will not be what we remembered them to be. So it's really important that you condition yourself to moving forward rather than living in the past.
Yeah.
Moving forward with those adjustments and being accepting of the differences and the different ways of doing things that are going to be coming your way.
Yeah.
And not try to jump in where you left off, but to sort of gradually, step back in.
Yeah, a very important point. Stan, how's the situation affecting running coaches in terms of getting back into using the tracks and things? So I know you've been doing a lot of stuff remotely on Zoom, but how's it affecting you getting back into or going forwards into that post-COVID world?
Yeah, I think, I think what's going to happen is gradually, strategies are going to have to be formulated, to be able to, that are pertinent within the current environment, and also within the constraints of the freedoms that people have been given going forward. But it is within the limits and within the observations necessary for that to happen. And so I can see a situation where clubs and coaches are changing the whole group coaching mentality that unfortunately will have to be, really looked at closely. And I'm sure it's going to change its form, and it's going to change the way it functions, because you simply cannot do that anymore without breaching some of safety and some health and safety regulations with it. Yeah, so that is going to have to change and follow up with what's happening in many other industries. Staggered training, maybe, staggered training, which is possible. I think that the advantage that athletics has got, if I may call it that, it's, for endurance runners, the nature of the event is that sometimes it gives the athletes lots of space, and so the difficulties there, the degree of difficulty there is definitely less than in other, in other sports, in other, athletics events, which are shorter distances where there is a bit of social compression. But those have to be then, looked at closely, and I'm sure similar strategies will be employed there, where health and safety of the athletes is key, and the social distancing must be not only be apparent, but be seen to be, to be the practice of the day.
Brilliant. That's been really helpful. Really helpful.
Yeah.
Shamim, is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of what we've talked about this evening?
No, I think it's really, I think when recognizing that during this time, we have the time, or when I say I have the time, I think you've got a little bit more time to work on the mental side of your performance, if you like. So, a lot of people who are athletes or high performance individuals who are so used to being active and physically active, for instance, can still work on their mental side. And you spoke about this earlier. I think it was you, Stan, was sort of saying, or Stephen actually was sort of saying that, the sort of mental rehearsal is just as important and can even tire you just as much as when you're actually physically doing the activity. We know that the brain can't really distinguish between whether you're mentally rehearsing something or physically doing something. But what it is doing is it's really strengthening those neural pathways. So through mental rehearsal, so that when you actually do get out there again and start to engage in your activity, it's almost as if you've been practicing for a while, because you've been cognitively, mentally rehearsing that activity. Now, don't get me wrong, it's just as important to keep the physiological aspects up and the biomechanics, the biomechanical movements. So if you can find some time to adjust within your environment, and I'm sure Stan has covered that in the past, a few weeks, but 3 aspects: it's the biomechanical, physiological, but also very much the cognitive aspects involved in maintaining adaptation through this period, which will help you ease back in a little bit easier when things do lift, rather than having done absolutely nothing.
No, it's fantastic. And Stan, if there's anything you'd like to add, then please feel free to.
Yeah, in the same thread, the same theme that Shanima's, just finished on there, which is, it is time. Yes, the space is a bit a premium in that there's not a track, there's not the football field, there's not a rugby field, to go on and express all these physical biomotor, competencies. But I think what it does, what the current, circumstances has provided all athletes of whatever sport, is to go back on some things that we don't usually spend time on. It's time to introspect and look at other competencies within your skill set. And usually technique and skill is something that, we don't give too much time out there. And with this confinement, it does provide a huge opportunity for athletes to look at their movement. It's time just to look at your movement, the fundamentals of movement, so that there is effectiveness in it, there's efficiency in it, there's economy in those movements, because you have realigned, the biomechanics of your sport or your event. And if you can polish up and tidy up, your technique, it really would stand you, athletes in good stead, whenever it is that you get back into sport. So yes, it is a time for me to invest in technique development and movement efficiency. That's what I would say, Steve.
Brilliant. Sorry, there's a question on Facebook.
Yeah.
I said that you might have some more questions on this because it's a little bit ambiguous, but the question is, can post-traumatic growth increase sporting performance?
Post-traumatic growth.
Post-traumatic growth. I think I've asked him for clarification, so he'll clarify that. But yeah, I'd be interested to know what post-traumatic growth is, whether it's through physical trauma or through emotional trauma as well. But yeah, certainly things in the past are going to have quite a big impact on most performance going forwards, positive or negative, depending on what your perception is of it, I guess. So, and what the strategies are that you have around that. So that would certainly be interesting. But yeah, do you deal much with people with past trauma, emotional trauma, Shamima?
I have done, I have done, Stephen, and I think it's also important to realise that with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's almost as if the body records the trauma.
Yeah.
So it's really getting people to connect with their bodies again, and understand how the trauma is caught up in their body, because there's a disconnect between the brain and the body, if you like.
Yeah.
So it's bringing them back online with that. But that kind of trauma can be injury trauma. So an athlete who's really suffered quite badly with injuries previously, and then that's a reoccurring injury concern or re-injury fear, if you like.
Yeah.
That it can be holding them back.
Absolutely.
And not just holding them back, it could also be, a trigger for more injury. And so that's something that you really need to manage and be aware of. Are they ready to return to the sport environment or the athletic environment, mentally and not just physically?
Yeah, very interesting. So the gentleman's just shed a little bit more light on it. So he says that post-traumatic growth is where you grow after the traumatic event, like COVID-19, and a traumatic event can be a positive event in the future, and he hopes that makes sense. So I guess I think he was originally looking on how it's looking at using that to increase sporting performance as well. So I guess the positive aspects of it.
Okay.
I think it's I've got a question that might give that a bit more context. Do you think it's situational? So someone's been in this very stressful environment. Is there we call it transference, don't we, where someone takes information from one activity and applies it to other activities? I guess it's a very individual thing, whether people can transfer that onto their sporting performance to help increase their sporting performance. Does that make sense?
I'm not quite sure what this topic is, where we're going with this, but I think it's really important to, when we are subjected to a little bit of difficulty, if you like, that kind of challenge and stress, if we develop the qualities and find the ways of coping with that difficulty through a scenario like this, and we come out the other end of it with being able to function through that time, we're building that resilience, we're developing that resilience. So I see it as rather than as trauma growth, as resilience, developing resilience. There's challenge, and if we can meet with that challenge and grow with that challenge, we are developing that capability to continue functioning and meet with challenges in the future.
So it's not situational then, because like if I was a tennis player and I went to play badminton, they're both racket sports. Certain elements would carry across, but not all of the elements would carry across. Would you say that psychological aspects of that transference are situational, or are they kind of general, as in you're building general resilience that applies to everything you do afterwards?
I can't answer that, actually, Stephen, because I don't know if there are studies that show any differences or not. What I do know is that what I imagine, or rather not what I do know, what I imagine is that it's about developing the qualities to help you deal with difficulties.
Yeah.
So if you can develop those qualities and psychological qualities to deal with scenarios in life, I think they do transfer.
Yeah.
So, they're life skills is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So the idea of being able to use self-talk mechanisms and imagery and visualization techniques to be more compassionate with yourself, but be also to implement those skills like attention skills and focus skills. These are all things that can help you in a number of different environments, not just specific to a particular sport. So I think if you challenge yourself in a number of different ways and are finding that you have and utilize some of these skills and qualities to enable you to perform in one particular sport, I would suggest that it is transferable to another sport.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you very much. He's very happy. So he's gone away with an answer to a burning question. So that's fantastic. So Shamima, the Power Hour for us is all about empowering people with skills. So what would you say your top 3 takeaway points would be from this evening's talk to wrap it up in a nutshell?
So what would I give someone and empower them to go away and do, in other words?
Yeah, kind of, yeah, but non-specific. So it's not specific advice, general advice for a situation like dealing with COVID, for example.
Set yourself a task every night that you want to complete the next day. In setting that task, think about goal chaining it. So to make it easier for you to adhere to. So when I talk about goal chaining, I mean, like if you are going to set out to go and run, and that's one thing you want to achieve tomorrow, get your kit ready and in place the morning or the night before, get it out, make sure your trainers are near the door. So set up these little cues to help you actually get out the door and execute the task at hand, if you like. And really be compassionate with yourself. I think during this time, a lot of people are feeling guilty, getting upset with themselves because they're recognizing that they're not as productive as they are. But monitor your self-talk and your internal dialogue. Be curious about it. When does it show up? How does it show up? Develop that awareness, but with some compassion. And stay healthy. Eat well, sleep well, hydrate well.
Nice and simple, just like that. Brilliant. That's really good advice. Thank you very much. And Stan, what would you say your top 3 tips are to go away with tonight?
Well, mine would be within, I would like to pick on, the performing athletes, and this includes the beginner. They're looking for a performance. I think it's time to focus on your movement. Movement is the foundation of any sport, at whatever level. And if your movement is right, your performance, you're giving yourself, a huge latitude and potential to be able to perform well. Focus on your technique. And I think that's, for me, would be the biggest advice that I would give. Focus on your technique, focus on your movement, and improve. Look at the variances within your movement, within your performance, and start, because we all have weaknesses within those performances. And within this constraint, it's time to work on those, reduce the variance between our strong points and our weak points within your performance, skill set. So those would be my advice, going forward from tonight.
Brilliant, fantastic advice. Thank you very much. If you stay on the line, so I did this. We had a footballer on the line, Shamima, the other night, and I said goodbye to everyone, and then she disappeared as well. I didn't even get a chance to say thank you. So please don't go anywhere. But if you're watching on Facebook, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you guys tonight, and hopefully you found that useful. If you're watching it back on the replay, then just put #replay, and we'll cycle back to any questions that you might have about some of the things, and we can put you in contact with Shamima to talk with her directly, or Stan to talk with him directly if it's more athletic performance that you'd like, or if it's more mind performance, then Shamima is your lady, so speak to her. But it's been great talking to you tonight, but sadly it's bye-bye from me, and bye-bye from the team as well.
Bye-bye. Cheers.
Okay, see you later.
Yeah.
Bye.